Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and everybody in the Denver metro area listening today. You are listening to KGNU. My name is Astin, and welcome to Metro Arts on the second Friday of the month. There is no Cafe Nuba today, but if you join us next month in June on the second Friday, that will be their grand send-off show, in case you were wondering. I am from an organization called Cafe Cultura. We have been in the Denver metro area for about 15 years now, and we are focused on poetry, indigenous identity, and youth. And today with us, I have the feature from our open mic event that we had in April. I have with us Mateo today. Mateo, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, thank you. And so today, we're going to take a listen to some of the poems that you performed at that show, and we're going to learn a bit about you, what makes you tick, what makes it so that you wrote this poetry that you did, and maybe give some advice to aspiring artists out there as well. So tell me, how long have you been a poet?
I've been a poet for a considerable amount of time. I first started writing poetry when I was like 11 years old because I had a really cool teacher who was actually friends with some of the members of Slam Nuba.
Okay.
So like naturally she just kind of plugged that into some of her lessons and stuff, and I was just very drawn to it because I had already been writing. Most of that writing that I did before that though was more so just like storytelling. So it was like kind of like fantastical sort of themes and stuff, but I think like I was really drawn to poetry and specifically spoken word more so for that like almost like that social justice component of it, of like, being able to talk about my identity and like things I had gone through.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of how I really got into stuff. And later on I just started competing because there was also like that slam poetry element as well.
Yeah.
When I heard about that, I remember like being 11 years old and actually looking up to people who were on Slam Nuba, and then eventually I actually met them and was able to collaborate with them, and some of them became my mentors, so it kind of worked out in a pretty good way.
That's pretty amazing. I know when I was 11 years old, probably my biggest concern was what my mom packed me for lunch. So that's pretty amazing that you were able to find a passion that drives you like that from such an early age. And you are how old now, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 18, turning 19 in August.
Okay. So yeah, you've been honing this talent of yours for pretty much your whole youth, basically. Mm-hmm. And now you're at a point where you're going into adulthood with this skill that you've honed throughout all that time. Mm-hmm. What does the future look like for you, if you were to guess?
As far as like poetry and
yeah.
Yeah, I think like, having had the opportunity to like compete and also just like, hone that craft throughout like my adolescence and stuff, I guess like the future that I see for myself is like kind of passing that on, because I think like for myself, I think it's very important for me to like take the skills and the experiences that I've had and kind of give back.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sounds like super cliche, I guess, but I think like especially with artistry, I think it can be like really easy to kind of like be like, okay, like I'm doing this for myself, you know what I mean, and kind of take that route. And I think that's totally okay, I think for myself though, like I've always like been very passionate about not only like uplifting like my voice and like kind of proving to myself like I can do this and like I can speak my truths and stuff like regardless of what my age is, but I think like also instilling that in other youth right now is like something that's very important to me. So like I've just been getting involved as much as I could like with for example, like summer programs at my college right now, because I go to the University of Boulder, Colorado, and up there I'm helping with some of their writing programs and stuff for high schoolers. So like I think just kind of getting more involved with that is, kind of what my trajectory is going to be.
Yeah, teaching the youth is a very important thing, and it's an urge that everybody seems to have, no matter what kind of artistry they're involved in. Mm-hmm. They'll develop their own skills, and then they'll find like, this is all well and good, but I'm not the only one. There's going to be somebody else who's got to do this at some point. There's always that urge with people. It's just kind of a strange thing like that. I'm not sure what it is, but that just always happens.
Yeah, definitely.
So in a moment here, I'm gonna play a couple pieces from that open mic that we did in April.
Mm-hmm.
And these particular poems have a lot to do with cultural identity as well as local identity living in Denver. I take it that that's a big sticking point for you in terms of your work. Can you talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, I think like my work has always been like very informed by the place that I grew up. It's like, it's been a very unique experience being able to not only like be mentored by people who are like Denver local artists, but then also just like growing up here in the particular time that we're in, seeing like a lot of like, for example, gentrification and just like changing in the city. Like, I think I'm in a very historic moment of the city. So like, I think that's kind of just reflected in my poetry, growing up, like I'm very shaped by a lot of the events that have taken place. And I think my poetry kind of reflects that. But I think, there's also this aspect of like, in addition to it just being a part of like, my history, I think it's also, important for me to empower myself and empower my community, like through my work. So like, I definitely want people to remember what Denver was like when I was growing up and like kind of what it was like for me in my community and like the way that I view it. So yeah.
Yeah. Keeping the way it is now alive through the power of words. I think that's a really important thing, and that explains some of the work that we're going to hear just now. I'm going to pull this up, and we're going to listen to a couple of pieces from this April open mic. So here is Mateo from the April open mic of Cafe Cultura. Let's take a listen.
My mom was 15 years old when she first came to the United States from Mexico, when she first left home. She tells me about how she swam across the river to get here, arms and legs aching with both give and let. Give, give, give. My mom has always been a giver, even when all she wanted to do was just let herself go limp and be swept under the belly of the tide. She tells me about the arms of the river slapping raw and rapid against her skin, trying to swallow her whole. She tells me about the coyote who gathered her destiny into his arms, slung it over his shoulders, and carried her the rest of the way there. Mi ama is the strongest Latina that I know. She is the strongest person that I know. She is the woman who taught my brothers and me what it means to love. And love means finding promise and joy through sacrifice. She has embedded this into my skin, teaching me the legacy of sacrifice in our DNA, braving the adversity of being an illegal, an alien, a prisoner in this purported land of the free. My mom still grapples with that river every single day, dodging ICE in her neighborhoods, that elusive boogeyman haunting the undocumented in this country. She was eventually able to get her papeles. Love means finding promise and joy through sacrifice. It's my mom speaking the language of her children, whose heritage is slowly slipping away until the R's in our sentences are only a slight stumble on the roof of our mouths. Love is untangling the twine of a foreign language around my mother's native tongue and overcoming the anxiety that swells in her chest when her mouth can wrap itself around Spanish, but English sits hesitantly at the bottom of her throat. Love means finding promise and joy through sacrifice. My mom has grit teeth to powder, enduring the abuse of employers who are quick to take advantage of those who struggle to speak the language, who mistake an accent for uneducated and don't understand. An accent means that you know two languages. All this to send home a paycheck, that American dollar lifeline to a family still living in poverty back in Mexico. She knew it meant the difference between clothes in the winter or freezing, between food on the table and starving. Love means finding promise and joy through sacrifice. Mi ama has grappled with el machismo. His cold, bloodshot stares have left handprints on the darkest corners of her heart. His abuse has left her body a crime scene. Now the choked breath that she is courageous enough to utter today. Machismo's spirit lived on through husbands whose rough, calloused hands never learned the give that my mom always gave and only knew take, 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 until there is nothing left. Their hands are still phantom in su piel, like a chalk outline that remains long after the crime has been committed. Love means finding promise and joy through sacrifice, and this is the reality of being an immigrant in the United States of America. It is reliving that immigration story, facing that river every single day and living with the fear of drowning. It is sowing the seeds you wish to reap in search of a better life. My mom has spent too long sowing seeds for the lands of others, reaping a harvest that is not her own. It is because of this that my brothers and me have vowed to become educated Latino men. Our prosperous future is the fruit of my mother's labor. Because love means finding promise and joy through sacrifice. It's about time she reaped her reward now. In a study by the Denver Public Works, 408 people were asked to describe Federal Boulevard, the street I grew up along. Responses would be used to generate an urban development plan for the surrounding area to be implemented in the coming years. Among the most popular responses were congested, dirty, ghetto, and unsafe. This is my response. An ode to Federal Boulevard. To your concrete exterior beneath shadeless sky, your wrinkled asphalt worry lines and chipped paint refusing rejuvenation, potholes that demand attention. Ode, yes, even to your crazy intersection off of Morrison, with the crooked lanes and the blinking eye, to streets too small for trucks so grand, for lowriders bumping too close to the earth. Ode to graffiti and murales mexicanos, to tag artists who work best under the cloak of night and without permission, who taught me how to make a rose bloom from concrete, how to raise revolution while the world is sound asleep. Ode to fathers who slip from porch doors before sunrise to file in the unemployment line, to mothers tucking kids in bed before the graveyard shift because la familia es lo más importante. Family is the most important thing. Ode to the RTD bus line running until midnight, with the still broken ticket machine letting passengers in for free. For the bus stop squatters and the old ladies who give them change, teaching me how much $1 really costs. Ode to Vietnamese pho and taco trucks on every corner. Thriving community defying any business model. To Little Mexico and Little Saigon for always keeping me fed. To the migrant construction workers and business owners who built this barrio from the ground up, who teach that pride and authenticity cannot be feigned. To the paleteros y eloteros who scale Federal sloped back, the neverias de Chihuahua, Juarez y Michoacan, serving cool nostalgia beneath a boiling sun, sweetness that can only mean home. Ode to Sunday night drag races, DPD's hottest night of the week, where Mercado parking lots become car shows and corridos y banda blast like gospel. Brown boys driving fast flash smiles bright as rims, give police sirens a run for their money. To the beggars on Alameda and the jaywalkers tempting fate, an ode to ghosts. To Our Lady Guadalupe, who guides car accident victims in the light of veladoras. To wilted marigold and rose bouquets that are never swept away. I, driver's permit fresh in hand, cruise slowly beneath neon signs wagging their nagging fingers. Slow down, 9 traffic deaths in 2017, drive drunk and go to jail. They think we are stray dogs who can't stop running into our own deaths. Federal, how many unnamed children do you hold in your outstretched arms? I want to give the 5 police officers harassing a homeless man on Florida a neon sign. I want to give the 4 police officers who tackled my classmate on Mississippi a neon sign. I want to give the police officer who killed Paul Castaway on Morrison Road a neon sign. Federal, you couldn't shield my eyes from life's hardest lessons. How to create memorials. I must write odes in place of eulogies. The golden cranes from Northside are moving in on your tarred feet. You're getting a makeover, new sidewalks, and a paint job to match. They think they can pave away your history, but I will always remember. An ode to Federal Boulevard, the street with the most heart in the Queen City of the Plains, for always guiding me home.
All right, you have just been listening to Mateo performing at Cafe Cultura's April open mic. Mateo, that was a great performance. I was in the audience and listening back to it again. I must say you do have a talent that sounds like you've been honing it for many years. Do you think you could talk to us about these 2 poems in particular?
Yeah, just to start with the first one, so that one is titled Ama. It's just about my mom and kind of her struggles like coming here as an immigrant, and I don't know, just kind of like the multiple different layers that she's kind of like dealt with in that particular struggle. Like employment, machismo, sexism, all sorts of different things.
Yeah. And what about the piece about Federal Boulevard? Being as someone who lives in Denver, it's nice to have a poem like that goes into it. Really captures the feeling of like a place that I know particularly well because I live here. I know it, and hopefully the people listening wherever you are will also be able to have some familiarity with that.
Yeah, totally. I think like more specifically on that piece, I mean that was very specifically sort of inspired by, I think I mentioned this too, like in the piece, but this survey that I had seen that people were taking, it was super strange. I like actually looked into that survey that they were giving out to like residents of like, that sort of general area of like Federal, and like it was just a lot of like, I mean, just like white people and people who had like, I'm pretty sure had just like moved here,
Right.
And like just seeing the different words that they used to describe Federal was just so different from my own experience that I was like, I mean, we got traffic for sure, but that's not what I think about when I think of my hood, you know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
yeah.
and I don't know, I think that sort of piece was just kind of inspired by that feeling of like kind of like injustice and like anger, and but also wanting to kind of take a spin on those things. And like, I mean, you hear odes to like, cathedrals, odes to like all of these other like really amazing places, but you hardly ever hear odes to like your hood or odes to like the place that you grew up in that other people kind of may undervalue. So I kind of wanted to take a spin on that and just kind of show everybody this is what my community means to me, and like this is kind of how I feel about it in contrast to what you may say about it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and that really illustrates the importance of local art in particular, because the youth will see like odes to cathedrals or whatever, and they'll see like that stuff as having that importance, whereas something like Federal Boulevard to them is just like a street, and maybe a bad one at that. Like,
Yeah.
to have something like that, I think it's very important to them. But you were saying that you're channeling all these feelings of like anger and discrimination and all these other things, and you have all these really big concepts, and you're trying to distill them down into a few minutes of a poem.
Yeah.
That's something that is very hard to do. How do you basically? What is your writing process? How do you transform all of these emotions into a tangible poem like that? What do you do?
Yeah. My writing process, I think, is a little bit different. When I talk to like other poets that I'm friends with, like they always have like kind of more specific ideas of what they're doing. But I think for me, like the process of writing a poem is very emotional. So sometimes it can take me like several months to actually write a poem. And I think like that's important to talk about, is like, if it doesn't come out right away, it might be because you haven't worked through it. 'Cause I think like for myself, like I definitely had to be in this like particular moment of like, having processed through my feelings about Federal and like all these different things to be able to write that piece. So for me, I think the writing process looks a little scattered, as far as like, like this idea of a poem like kind of came to me one day, but it didn't come together for a couple of months. And like part of that was because I was trying to figure out, what does Federal mean to me, and like what does this mean, and what do I want other people to take away from this poem that they couldn't take away if someone else was writing this story, right?
Right.
So I think like, yeah, like it kind of started off as just this idea, and then like every now and again, like when I was going down Federal, because pretty much I would go down Federal all the time when I was in high school just to get to school, right? Like I would write lines, or like I would be inspired by something like that I was just like around in the neighborhood for, and like seeing like stray dogs on the street, or seeing or going to pho or something like that.
Yeah.
It was all like the beauty that was captured in those specific moments, but then also like with the tragedy and like all the other aspects of what it means to actually come from this neighborhood. So yeah, I think it's an emotional process for sure.
That makes sense, given all of the heavy topics that you're talking about in your poems. For it to take such a long time to do that, it makes sense, and that leads us into another piece that I'm going to show from yours. it's a bit different from the first two that we just listened to. It has to do more with personal emotions in terms of a relationship. And I imagine, talking about your neighborhood where you grew up, a street, the emotions that come from that, they can be very intense, but I imagine a relationship's a bit different. So
This one took much longer to write for sure.
yeah. Okay. Well, we'll let the listeners here learn about what we're talking about in particular here, and we'll have them listen for themselves. So, listeners, this once again is Mateo from our April open mic, and here is another piece from him.
We used to say our love was cosmic. Your last letter to me, a hand-traced rendition of Tezcatlipoca on a bright orange placard, said we felt ancient together. You wrote that you had had a dream. You, me, on a beach in San Francisco with him. You didn't know what that meant, but you knew that I had always wanted to move to California and that he was the Aztec god of self-reflection. I knew how much you loved the sea. You had hoped that he could help me through whatever I was going through. You always spoke like that. Simple, yet understanding, a contrast to my constant noise and need to explain. I remember our trip to San Francisco, where you held my hand at the edge of the Pacific and said, I want you to meet my mother. The clouds parted and the ocean grew warm at our feet as if to offer us her blessing. I thought of the oceans our parents, our ancestors had crossed for us to meet, how warmly they must have smiled down on us then. I think of the blessings our mothers gave us. Your mom, shuffling hurriedly around the house, uneasy with premonition, you asked, ¿Qué traes, mamá? Y ella te contestó con su intuición materna, tú y Mateo se van a casar. She said it like a fact. I think of my mom giving us a ride back to your house when she joked we might adopt children and give them a good home if you didn't want to bear them. And in this quiet way, I knew she liked you too. So if our love was cosmic, and I do believe it was, then our break was all the more earth-shattering. I have struggled to write this poem, this epic, for the past year since. It was never easy for me to write a love poem to you, as I am a perfectionist at heart, so I wrote so many it pains me you may never get to see. To string together our love into a coherent composition would have been to imply that our love was anything but timeless. It was a crisscrossing of lifetimes I could never contain. Truth be told, I never thought we would end, so I never thought to write one. Part of me still doesn't believe we have. As we used to say, time doesn't exist. But as indignant as I am only human, and the grief I have felt for your loss has been one of the greatest wonders of my world and demands I approximate the feeling nonetheless. So, we were two astronauts plunging headfirst into the sun, and wasn't it so warm? You made my heart leap. I would have broiled just to be close to you. I paid no attention to the warning signs, this radioactive heat threatening to poison us, destroy us if we flew too close. I had never felt a touch light and pure as yours. Past loves had heavy hands, left me sun-seared. My skin grew thick as scars. If it were up to me, I would have held on till our future became stardust. Thank you. We were two astronauts headed straight into oblivion, a place you knew we wouldn't come back from. Thank you. Thank you for leaving before we burned out, before there was nothing left to come back for. The day you left me, a chain broke our gridlock. You bounded one way, I the other, us, two astronauts cut from the shuttle. You said, I love you and want to keep loving you, time and place willing, but we can't do this right now, the way we both are. I remember our last kiss in front of your house. I looked first at your closed eyes, then the darkness surrounding your silhouette, the sun dipping low and out of reach. How cold I felt then, the heartache deep as lineage torn by the seams, my shame bitter as your mom's tears when you broke the news. I didn't know how to tell my mom, so it took me a week. ¿Todavía no se amaban? You two didn't still love each other? She asked me, as if love were so simple for families like ours. We were both just depressed and we weren't growing anymore. It takes more than love to stay together, is what I told her. Shh, y'all felt that, damn, okay. It's not done, but is what I said. My mother, in a depressed marriage for over 30 years, did not understand, and she asked no more questions. We tried to remain friends for 2 months after our break, and I kept my distance. For as much as I longed for you, the temptation to rebound never trumped the respect that I had for you, the desire I had for the both of us to grow. A self-destructive hookup could have never compared to the beautiful love we shared. I regret trying to talk about what went wrong before the dust had settled. I was as stubborn as a magnet, trying hard to connect, but you repelled from me, bounded the other way. How naive to think I could process your loss in a mere 2 months. What has taken me a revolution around the sun to accept. To try, once again, to twist fate and my intuitions for an idealistic vision. For as beautiful as our love was, and even if you returned, we will never be the same. We can't be. And this, I know now, is for the best.
All right. Welcome back once again. You are listening to KGNU. You just heard a piece from Mateo from our open mic in April. That was quite a heavy piece, if I say so myself. Do you have anything you'd like to speak to that, just in terms of like, you know, the writing process or what it meant to you to write that or performing it for the first time? Because that was your first time performing it, right?
Yeah, that was my first time performing it. Yeah, and I think I was kind of saving that, you know, just for like, you know, a more specific audience, like people who might be able to relate to that. I had some people who came up to me afterwards and said like that definitely touched them. I guess what I would like to say in respects to this piece is just, I think, I don't know, when I was writing it, it took me a year, and that's something that I wrote like in the piece. And I think it's another one of those things where it was like I had to experience it and had to like process through it as I was writing it, you know. It wasn't something that just came together cohesively at all. And, you know, I guess that's kind of explaining why I used space so much as a metaphor, you know. It's like a very, I don't know, a place with like not a lot of determination as far as like, you know, like open possibilities and whatnot. But yeah, I think for me, like, it was just important to me to kind of pull together, you know, not only just like what did this person mean to me, but like what did it mean for me to lose them, and like what did I gain from that as well, from that loss,
Right.
from that grief process for sure. So,
well, I think that all comes through the piece very nicely. Unfortunately, I'd love to talk to you more, but unfortunately, we are running out of time here. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us about your poems, you know, hopefully inspiring some youth out there to start this themselves, because as you said before, you started when you were 11, and look at you now. You've got all of these poems here. Hopefully we will see you again at one of our future open mics. The next one will be the 4th Friday in May, which is coming up, and that will be May 28th. And that will be at Denver Open Media, 700 Kalamath Street in Denver. In June, this spot right here, the second Friday of the month for Metro Arts, that will be going back to Cafe Nuba, and that will be their big blowout finale show. That will be the end of Cafe Nuba. And then I, Astin, and Cafe Culture will be back in July on the second Friday, and we will be continuing from there on to do this show here. Mateo, thank you once again for joining us. And I'm going to let us play this out. This has been KGNU. Thanks for listening.